you for being here. We are very excited. We're kicking off season 3 of our Great Culture webinar series today. If you're new here or just joining us, each month we hear from insiders, expert analysis, and get an inside look on program and strategies for really what it takes to create a happy, healthy, and engaged workforce. Today, I'm joined by Haley Profit, and we are going to discuss revolutionizing employee engagement in the modern world, how to disrupt the norm and what that means, tactics to safeguard against burnout, and staying resilient in the face of challenges. So we really have a lot to go over today. As always, we want to keep our session conversational. We want to hear from you. So any comments, any questions, please drop those in and we'll go ahead and address them as we go. And happy Happy Galentine's Day. And we will announce the prize winner for the 2 Stanleys at the end of our session. So Haley, welcome. Thank you for being here. Haley is a fractional workplace well-being strategist with over 20 years experience in leading, implementing, and consulting on workplace well-being strategies. So Haley, could you share a bit of your background and what really drives your passion in workplace well-being?
Absolutely. Thank you so much to Amanda and the team. I'm excited to be here and have the conversation, but I love opening up, just getting to know the attendees and the crowd that are listening, and really sharing that my passion is long beyond just this career venture of focusing on corporate well-being. It truly is not only what my bachelor's degree and all of my credentialing and certifications over the years have been in, but it's recognizing that so much of the work I do and talk about goes back to myself when I was younger, and tapping into how that really curated this interest and passion in how do we take care of ourselves, but then in a larger perspective, how do we look at kind of that macro level and how when we care for ourselves, we're caring for others, we're caring for our communities, we're caring for our planet. And so my evolution in this space, I like to really go back and reflect on what I've learned in my own personal journey along the way, but more specifically, how it all translates into the workplace, into the workforce, into our organizations and businesses, so that we really can propel and lead with well-being as a core value.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm so happy you mentioned that. And it's something that comes up in a lot of health education or health coaching sessions that I do, and I feel that I say it often, is to put your oxygen mask on first. And when you're able to do that, when you are feeling your best, when you are your best, it just trickles everywhere.
Absolutely. Well, and you're going to hear us say things like that all day today. It's something that is so important, and we hear it all the time. We may know what we need to do or what we prefer, but it's truly taking action on it, being proactive about it. I mean, I have so many conversations, I'm sure like you, that can be in response to, can be very reactionary. And while, things like burnout and self-care and all of these buzzwords have been around a while, they resonate for a reason, because we have the research, we know the impact, and it's truly giving ourselves as experts and practitioners and the workers in this space the permission to embrace it.
Give yourself permission. Okay, so let's move into, hold on one second. I'm just going to check if everyone else is on silent, just because I'm hearing a bit of feedback. Okay, I think we're okay here. Sorry guys, just one sec as we continue on. Okay, and discuss, thank you forever, whomever made that adjustment, I appreciate it. Let's talk about the 2024 approach to well-being and what that means, and how this approach is very different from traditional models that we have seen in the past. So Haley, what is your take on this?
Yeah, well, I think that we're seeing a few different things here. One thing that I want to call out is whether you're using a model that works for your business or that you've had for a while, That's okay. But when we talk about how does this look different, it's recognizing we have a tremendous amount of data and influence that has really impacted how do we just reimagine what's going on, what's working, what isn't working. And I want to start with that first caveat because we spend a lot of time with the term, focus on the future and the future of work, and that is absolutely critical, especially to drive engagement, to drive success, to empower well being within an organization. But we also need to take that step back to not lose sight of the here and the now, the challenges, yet the opportunities, the successes we can celebrate, because those are looking very, very different too. And again, I can't emphasize enough. I hear so many times organizations just don't stop or pause or slow down enough to recognize, do we even track the challenges ahead and how we fix them? Do we even track meaningful metrics when we are looking at well-being or engagement or sustainability? And so there's so many components to break apart there. But if we really get down to it, it's beginning to look at what does work instead of focusing on what doesn't.
Mhm. Absolutely. So when we're thinking about what does work and emphasizing that, there has been, when we're thinking in terms of well-being, thinking of that comprehensive model, whether it's in utilizing and analyzing the 8 dimensions or the 6 dimensions of well-being. So what is your take on that now, Haley? And has that shifted slightly as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is certainly something to be said for using terms like people centric and human centric. And if we really want to say that we have, and then next step, if we really want to have comprehensive, holistic opportunities, it has to be people centric. It's expanding beyond models that maybe in the past weren't serving us well or weren't something that aligned and directly correlated to the success that we were striving for. So when we reflect on that comprehensive holistic piece, like you said, we have all of these different dimensions, but not all dimensions may apply in every single work capacity, and that's okay too. That's that autonomy to evaluate what isn't needed. But if we go back to how do we drive the engagement? How do we have participation and awareness and leadership buy-in? Then we have to know these things. And if we don't even know it of our population, it's hard to build something comprehensive. And I'm going to go back to what we said in the beginning. It's all about the permission. It is the permission, whether you are the well-being leader, you are that in-house or fractional external well-being person, to be the voice to just challenge a little bit of what does comprehensive even mean to us as an organization? What do we envision a successful, holistic, people-centered approach even looking like?
Mhm. Absolutely. And when we're looking at those traditional engagement models and reimagining them, it brings to mind a recent New York Times article, which many of you, I'm sure, have seen. It was all over LinkedIn and in the well-being space. And the article title is Workplace Wellness Programs Have Little Benefit. It was an analysis of a study that really looked at apps, health coaching, courses in time management, financial well-being, and found that they don't have much positive effect. And but there was an exception in that if if employees were given the opportunity to participate in volunteer work or charity work in some sort, that was very rewarding. So Haley, I just want to get your take on this study and what it's really saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so glad you brought it up, Amanda. When we go back to that term, kind of reimagining things, it can be a really positive, proactive lens for an organization to look through. And of course, as a practitioner of nearly 2 decades, the article wasn't my favorite, but I think we also have to acknowledge it's not the first time that we've seen an article similar. We haven't, this isn't a surprise to us. However, there's some points that I personally disagree with because I've seen tremendous success. One of the points that was brought up was around resiliency and stress management training. And does that actually hinder employees' well-being? Not just improve it, but does that actually impact it negatively? And what I consider to be successful is going to be based on the metrics and the success of the business. So I know I myself curated and launched back in 2016 an in-house resiliency program. It was an entire campaign. We have written case studies about it, and all it was the paradigm shift in our workplace to have the conversation, to use the language. At that time, there weren't as many apps as prolific and readily available on the market that we were comfortable with at that client. But when we reflected on we needed to start somewhere, that was a great jumping off point. But I also want to point out that in that article, there was something really interesting, and it was that employers wanted to be seen as doing something, right? So they're offering the apps, they're offering the programs and the challenges, which all can have a place, but they didn't necessarily want to look at the root cause in the business. They didn't want to make that level of change. And I think over and over, that's consistently part of today's message is we can do all of these wonderful offerings and strategy and implementation, but we have to know that at the core of it, a business, its leaders, its owners are willing to have a seat at that same table when we're talking about reimagining what it looks like.
Mhm. Absolutely. You can't walk the walk if the intentions behind it are false or
Yeah.
misleading. So
Yeah.
in bringing up your past a bit, and Haley did run a very successful wellness program at Garmin. Could you just give us a synopsis of this program and what you were able to accomplish during your time at Garmin?
Sure. In my tenure there, it was really stepping into a brand new role that hadn't existed before and truly building something from the ground up. I know I had briefly shared about the resiliency program, and it's just one mechanism that took listening to our audience, listening to my customers, the employees, to understand where are some of our greatest challenges, where can we implement some really intentional curated content, programs, support systems that are going to be most meaningful for those employees. But that also is so much broader, right? I heard all the way back in 2013 that it was of interest to start talking about mindfulness in the workplace. And that wasn't as prolific in a lot of large employers, high tech, engineer driven, only because it was new in that space. And so, even all the way back then, it was piloting programs, it was continuing to evolve what that offering of mindfulness, introducing some meditation if that was of interest. And one of the best things that I think we can celebrate out of that example was that it brought out an entirely new portion of the population that hadn't been engaged in other opportunities. Perhaps it was that traditional physical well being that they just felt, I've got this. I don't necessarily need the support. But whether it be stress or looking to connect with deeper purpose and meaning in their work, that program was something that was able to be successful in that arena. And I
Mhm.
would just say that that's really a reflection on a lot of my time at Garmin is how do we understand our population to see that policies do resonate and implementing well-being policies into our employee handbook, which then gave a tremendous platform to launch into employee training, leadership training, because it was about cultivating that repetitive language so that individuals, leaders, senior leaders are hearing, okay, this is important. I'm hearing this come up over and over. And now, guess what? I'm beginning to pick up on it in my team and what my team needs. And so just beginning to really curate that. And I also want to share, I think it's so important, Amanda, to know. Of course, there were senior leaders that were willing to champion some of the initiatives that I had. Others, it was pushing the envelope. It was not accustomed to be welcomed with open arms in that culture only because it was very curious. And so what I did was created this groundswell in a grassroots approach, to some extent, where I was hearing a different voice come to me as a well-being practitioner that I knew needed to be addressed. And so how could I advocate on behalf of our employees to know what they needed? Supporting caregiving ERGs and really challenging what that looks like, and how do we have vendor program support? Just really thinking outside of the box in that holistic. I'm going to go back to your multiple dimensions. It was
Mhm.
all about how can we reflect on these dimensions to give autonomy to what well-being looked like there, and then address the needs as they came up, knowing that it was constantly evolving and it wasn't one size fits all at any point in time.
I love that. And I think what's important to note also is that this is a very sustained approach that over many years to create a successful program that continually evolved to meet the needs of the employees. And I also just have to say, because just to keep it very real, is that for the well-being practitioner is exhausting.
Absolutely. Well, it's exhausting. And it also makes me think of, Amanda, there's things that are going to fail with it. I mean, that's every component of every role in every job, in every business, demographic, geographic, industry that you're in. And so how do we not become exhausted? How do we not feel like we're being knocked down if something isn't a success? I had to very quickly in my tenure there realize I was the expert and I was passionate about these things, but not everything was going to resonate with the crowd because that wasn't their background. It wasn't their expertise. And so it was on me to clearly, effectively communicate it if I felt that passionate about pursuing it. Also, to recognize if some of the things didn't go well, and it was a fail, if you will, or it wasn't as successful enough to continue pursuing, create this paradigm of, great, what can we learn? How can we still be positive and proactive to pursue other things that are just as equally meaningful, even if this one didn't work, instead of continuing to circle and spiral and have the same conversations if that wasn't going to drive as meaningful of impact? And like you said, that's exhausting. That's
Yeah.
exhausting.
Hmm. Hmm. And we're going to talk about more about burnout and flourishing as well shortly. But bringing up flourishing, let's go into some stats. And Haley, can you highlight some key findings and what we really know about flourishing at work and what that means?
Yeah, I love this topic. It is one that I absolutely lean into constantly. But, let's call a spade a spade. And none of this is or should be that surprising to us. We see these statistics all the time, we come across them in multiple reports. But what I think is especially important is to reflect, where do we have influence? And I want to reiterate that a couple times because we can get really hung up on, where do we have control? Where do we not have control? I think as many coaches, as we have on here and other practitioners, we talk about that a ton with clients, but it's also the influence. And how do we just influence driving metrics that are going to be impactful? When it comes to flourishing, I love this so much. And I've really spent the last year, year and a half diving even more into human flourishing and sustainability in the workplace. And really, what we're looking at is when we can tell our employees are thriving. So, when I can see it with my eyes, when we know our employees are flourishing because we see it in the data and the metrics that we're tracking, we can directly correlate it to the business and the performance. But I want to even emphasize, it's not just the business performance. This is key metrics we should be tracking in terms of, do people have a best friend at work? Do they have a great relationship with their manager? Do they feel that they are seen and heard? Do they feel like they belong in their workplace? Excuse me. And while we know those things and we hear them over and over, as a practitioner that's stressed and burnout ourselves, how do we just take that step back? And that's part of that oxygen mask experience, to recognize, have I been doing things this way just for the sake of it? Are our employees' experiences positive? Are we asking them questions? And then I just want to reiterate again, are we tracking things that are meaningful? One thing I see over and over in HR is just that state of reactionary movement all the time. And a lot of times, functionality wise, that is why that is the case. But how can we step back to say, if we're just collecting this data for the sake of collecting it and not really looking at it, not incorporating this into our true strategy and evaluating, is it even in alignment with our values? Then we're just doing a lot of work for the sake of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. What are we going to do with it? And I feel a bit of that reactionary spiral really amped up um, with the pandemic and COVID. Understandably, with HR, inundated, tons of things to do, but I feel like we're still spinning in some
Yeah,
regard.
I've even seen some recent numbers that would indicate we're going backwards. And
Ooh,
so we know that the immediate onset of the pandemic thrust conversations around well-being into a much higher level, senior leader forefront. And now we're seeing data that represents that that number is going backwards the last 2 years in terms of, is my leader as supportive of my well-being? Is my organization and business providing transparency and that safety in these conversations, the vulnerability to be able to have the conversation in the workplace in the first place?
absolutely. So moving on, then you touched on human sustainability. Haley, could you sum up what this is and what this really means?
Yeah, so as I had said, this idea and transition from just well-being to human sustainability is absolutely one of my favorite talking points. And Amanda, I'm going to briefly ask, I can't see the slide in front of me. Which one is up right now?
Right now it's human sustainability and has the hands grasping. It's
Perfect.
just an overview slide.
Okay, great. So with this idea, like I said, it's taking well-being from which has frequently been, unfortunately, in its own silo and really getting to the core of it. I had mentioned earlier when leaders are wanting to just offer well-being for the sake of it, or when employers are wanting to say that they're doing the right thing, but are they really getting down into the depths of what does our business need? And so with human sustainability, I love this approach of being able to step back and instead recognize well-being is a part of how we sustain. I had such a fun opportunity at presenting on this topic a few months back to a room of HR professionals and practitioners. And it's really just getting at the core of, we can work better. Are we willing to do it? And then what I want to emphasize, and I know we're going to get into the specifics with human sustainability, it isn't overshadowing what well-being is, but because it's looped into it, it's a very holistic approach and view on exactly what we've been talking about. How do we create that environment? How do we create the engagement that is all encompassing of everything that we want our people to have in order to flourish?
Absolutely. And part of that is empowering the change in your workplace.
Absolutely. We have to empower something to occur. We have to empower change to be welcome. We have to be on a pedestal of knowing the work we're doing is so important. I know that we have said this over and over, and I 100% can relate and understand being burnt out in this space of feeling so passionate and eager on these topics, yet there's so much work to still be done. So I'm excited that we can really leave today, hopefully, with some great information and tips for everyone here on how do we empower this change when we may not be the one in control.
Mhm. So let's go into the tips and discuss the reality of today's workplace, overcoming that burnout, and then going into the metrics. So Haley, the challenges to start. We know that HR well-being, it's very much life in the silo. It's a department of one or few. So what does that mean and to you, and how can that be improved upon?
Yeah, I love this phrase, kind of the reality of corporate life, because I'm sure that many of you on here today can certainly relate to it. I've said before, how do we empower ourselves to be proactive instead of reactive? How do we think about being in response to instead of reacting to? We have these challenges. We know that we are constantly being looked under a microscope in terms of, is there success? What are we learning? Are we comfortable with even what we're learning? If I'm honest, there's a lot of workplaces beginning to reflect on vendor and program fatigue, just in terms of how do we create an ecosystem where that isn't the sense and we can be proactive. It doesn't mean we have to do away with all of our programs and vendors, but that's part of that corporate reality. A topic that I know I, especially in this latter half of experiencing the pandemic, have been passionate about discussing in the workplace is wellness washing, well-being washing. We know the data out there that does directly show workplaces offering all of these great things. But if you look at utilization, is that even remotely what you would expect? Is it even remotely something that you're proud of? Does it make sense? And with that well-being washing, being really careful that that isn't damaging to the psychological safety of your workplace. So here we go, looping everything together, because in the beginning, we said if we want to curate something meaningful and holistic and comprehensive, we've got to start at the base. We have to start at the ground to know what is appropriate and what isn't. Overcoming burnout, again, I know we've mentioned that multiple times, but if we are not at minimum thinking about what we can influence instead of being caught up in what we can control, that can be part of leading to our burnout too. If we feel like we have been stuck in this silo of only well-being and only what we can control, that's going to be a part of that burnout experience as well. And I'm so passionate about the work of workplace well-being that I want similar practitioners and experts to such as myself to feel like we can burn bright, that we do have these passions for a reason. We have the expertise and the experience to ignite the same thing in a workplace, supporting the strategy. So when we're thinking about burnout, how are we curating our own ingenuity and creativity? How do we reflect and refine some of our own boundaries? I am loving this term of boundaryless HR to really, comprehensively look at, as I talked about human sustainability, look at the bigger picture. It doesn't have to be just a well-being silo. This is everything. And
Mhm.
then, not to beat the old drum that we have before, but when it comes to burnout, give yourself permission and the grace to truly walk the walk. We hear it all the time. We coach others to do so. We empower leaders to walk the walk. But as the leader and the practitioner yourself, whether you're just taking on well being as an added responsibility or it's your full time job, how are you having conversations about what rest and recovery looks like? How are you openly discussing your purpose? How do you
Mhm.
use examples of your own connection? And then just honor your resilience. When you are sharing your own level of resilience and being resilient, that's creating a cohesive relationship in the workplace where others can relate to you. Relatability is so important for connection. And then I'd lastly just encourage, as you think about burnout, how is this part of well-being kind of in our flow of work? It's not something we're doing in addition to or on top of. And what I would emphasize there is vulnerability, transparency, and again, those boundaries. If we ourselves are so stressed and so consumed by the responsibility and the heaviness and success of maybe a program we're running, are we transparently communicating some of our mature vulnerability? So, not just complaining for the sake of complaining, not being reactionary, as I said, but diving even deeper. And then lastly, these metrics. I think these metrics for human sustainability are so important to really bring it all home. So again, you don't feel like you're a silo focusing on well-being alone, but rather, how do you find a meaningful metric point in your workplace for each of these areas. Well-being, you may already have something, but what are you doing for purpose? How do you discuss meaning and purpose in your workplace? Another really, really passionate kick that I am on in supporting so many other practitioners, experts in this area is the DEIB. You know, we have so many workplaces that through the pandemic launched fantastic employee resource groups, business resource groups. I have been a part of chartering many myself. However, we have to include belonging, and this is not a check the box. We are offering these, we are asking if they resonate, we are tracking what this is doing for our business, for our organization. It's not just a one size fits all. And again, the business has to be willing to address the root cause of perhaps why some of these DEI initiatives are even being requested. And then I want to lastly emphasize, Amanda, when we think about human sustainability, and I keep thinking, you know, it's such a big picture. I'm such a visual person. It really is, how do we incorporate career in that? Career development, career advancement, employability of individuals. Because whether this has been something that we as practitioners have been tasked with before, we know now more than ever financial well-being and stress, that is in our wheelhouse of what we're helping to support. Career growth, personal growth, professional growth, all of that is part of well-being too. I'm going to go back to those dimensions that we mentioned earlier today. And so how do we just recognize where we can support all of these, how we can drive the overall business impact on our communities for long-term society change, human sustainability?
Mhm. Excellent. And when we're talking about the metrics, Haley, combining different metrics, combining human flourishing with well-being, with the sustainability, what does this look like for an individual and for an organization?
Yeah, and it's a great reflection. You know, it's kind of that mirror analogy of what are we doing in our professional capacity? What are we tracking? What does that roadmap for success look like? But when we look in the mirror, what are we doing for ourselves? How are we tracking our success? And then to kind of jump ahead a bit, how do we advocate for that for ourselves and for the workplace? And so I really encourage folks, when you're thinking about metrics in all of these, again, I'm going to go back to that human sustainability. That way, it's not just well being. We all have read so much about, is there ROI? Is there not? Is it VOI? Is it not? But if we can take a human sustainable approach to the metrics that we're tracking, it truly is giving us that holistic, comprehensive view on not only their well-being, but do they have a sense of purpose and meaning? Are they connected to the resources our business is providing? And are we, as the employer, holding up our end of the bargain to help elevate them, to see those high performers, to support them? I mean, you want to talk metrics and burnout, it's really scary when we see the numbers and the percentages of burnout, but then pair that with high performers and how much more quickly they're burning out. And that in and of itself should be very concerning to workplaces.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think moving on, we've set a very clear picture, and Haley, you've done an excellent job of setting a clear picture of where we are today. And where can we go from here? What are the strategies and the solutions to move forward and start to at least put the oxygen mask on for a few minutes?
Yeah. So I want to go back and re-emphasize. I think number one, it's how do we advocate for ourselves? How do you advocate for what your needs are? How do you advocate for where you need clarity? And I'm not just talking clarity in your role, I'm talking where you need clarity from the business so that you can be successful. That might look like part of your engagement strategy. It may look like it's part of your HR or corporate sustainability or ESG strategy. Ask those questions. Be really curious and be accountable. If there isn't anything else that I emphasize to individuals, Take the accountability. Like I shared earlier, trust me, I have launched many programs and initiatives that weren't the greatest. They just didn't land, they didn't resonate, but that's okay. Take accountability for it, be vulnerable and open enough to share. But if we're not advocating for ourselves to perform and do those things, we're not getting the opportunity, and that's on us. And then how do you find other advocates? How do you create a strategy in your workplace where there are individuals who will advocate for you when you're not in the room? So who is there that will vouch for you? Who is there that will support you and what you're asking for, what you are trying to establish as part of your strategy, whether it's just well-being still or it's moving into that human sustainability approach? And then I'd also add that, for me, I see a tremendous amount of success when a strategy is around this idea of human flourishing and focusing on truly a holistic view to say it's not just my well being alone. I'm going to take that step back. And with flourishing, am I identifying productive, positive emotions in my day? Am I cultivating opportunities to experience that? Am I seeking my own level of engagement? Because I want to call out there's something very different between being passionate about the work we do, but being engaged in the work we're doing. And so how do we find rhythms of flow and incorporate flow state into what we're doing throughout our day, throughout our tasks? Relationships, we know how important those are in the workplace. Are we setting clear goals for ourselves? And then ultimately, then you get to vitality. So if you notice, when I encourage to determine what your level of human flourishing is, we start with all of these other groundswells that are so important to have as our foundation. Those are the needs that we must have first and foremost before we can even get to health and vitality and individual well-being. So I think that those are certainly some places that I would say start. And then just define what you want. Define what does that look like? I'm such a visual person that sometimes when I'm road mapping my success, I'm truly going to work out and outline what does this look like? Well, maybe this fits in a different place. And that for me is one technique that keeps me from hitting the burnout point. It
Mhm.
keeps me from getting to that stress and overwhelm, and I'm not accomplishing something, which is part of human flourishing. But instead, I can take the step back, kind of disconnect from something I might be hyper focused on to evaluate, oh, here's a missing component I didn't even recognize because I was so in my head.
Absolutely. These are excellent tips and strategies. And I think just as we start to wrap up, please feel free to drop us a note, a comment, or a question in the box. But what could this look like in our own personal growth, and how do we get into that flow state? How can we get back to thriving?
Yeah, I love this. And so we've covered a lot of these already, but for individuals, I'm going to encourage you, go back into that flow state that I mentioned. Evaluate what does that look like. Begin to notice the language you're using on describing, how something is going on a project or where you feel maybe not supported. That's going to be those productive emotions. I'm such a fan of Susan David and her work around emotional agility. The idea of name it to tame it. If we are not using productive language to reflect the productive emotions that we want, that is going to hinder us. So find a strategy in human flourishing that really does support you. Flow, Amanda, I know you brought up flow again. Flow state is one of my favorite because it's just really interesting lens that if we apply that in any work environment, individuals, including ourselves, will be more productive. We're more connected to the work we're doing. We are driven by meaning. I mean, we all know that the definition of flow is truly losing track of time, but this is because you're so captivated by what you're working on. And equally important, I want to add a caveat here. Find time for flow. Find projects and calendar block those for your flow state. But also the research that we're seeing around unstructured time. Having unstructured time as an individual, as a team, as a department. I have seen some smaller organizations do this across the board as a business. This is dedicated, unstructured time. If we are asking people to show up and be resilient and flourish and have human sustainability, they need capacity to do so. And then I just want to touch on briefly kind of this idea of challenging the status quo. To tap into your own ability to flourish, don't not challenge things. Don't throw your hands in the air and say, I'll just give in if I don't get my way on these things that I know I'm passionate about. So find opportunities where you can lead that conversation. You can lead some communication around driving things, pushing that envelope a little bit. We've said permission multiple times today. Grant yourself permission, but also seek the permission of others. Here is what I have found multiple times in different work environments. If perhaps I just work a very different way than that environment, if I ask them permission on sharing some details, sharing some feedback, as soon as you open it up, that is naturally going to pique their human curiosity and they're going to want to hear more from you. So instead of just assuming or inserting yourself up front, sometimes that approach is going to be tremendously successful. And then I love the phrase of listening to learn. How do we truly listen to learn? It goes back to the days of seek first to understand, then be understood from Franklin Covey, right? Years and years of hearing this. But to truly flourish and have human sustainability, how do we set up listening tours? How do we as individuals have those people that we can talk to that are not just hearing us, but willing to support us in our asks? Be curious with us in what we need and how we can evolve and move things forward. And hopefully that'll set you up on kind of a trajectory to recognize where this roadmap is going for you as an individual and where you want to take it.
Excellent. I love I haven't heard Franklin Covey in a good reference in a good minute. That was excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Haley. This is so much, so insightful and just so much to reflect on. And hopefully everyone can really take a tidbit and individualize it and create your own roadmap. Please feel free to drop any questions or comments into the chat. We definitely want to hear from you. A lot has been covered today. We do have one question coming in, Haley. Before we move on to what your take and what it takes for organizations to go from good to great, could you provide some examples on metrics, maybe some that you've seen that are unique and that have really worked for an organization or for an individual?
Sure, that's a big question, right? Because the metrics are going to look very, very different. So I'm going to kind of parse it apart a bit and reflect on those 5 areas in human sustainability that we'd shared and discussed. Only because I'm such an advocate for asking questions. That comes with the huge caveat in every workplace and every culture on, are you prepared to address them? So when it comes to metrics, I am such a fan for pulse surveys. How can you host and offer pulse surveys regularly, right? You're only as good as the data and the metrics that you're getting. With well-being, that could be a tremendous opportunity and platform to jump off the deep end and ask any question around well-being that you may not have any current data on, or you want to see if those metrics are moving. Even purpose, just asking questions. Do you have meaning and purpose? Right. So I think that there's a huge opportunity in pulse surveys in a lot of these spaces, even with DEI and belonging initiatives. Are we asking the right questions, or are we just assuming what people want and need in this space? Career growth, I've heard so many workplaces really leaning into, we are creating roadmaps and we're creating these outlines on what our positions internally look like. That's amazing. But make sure that you're still asking questions along the way to ensure it's being clearly communicated back to the employees and that there isn't any room for that confusion, which is going to create the disconnect and the burnout and the stress and the overwhelm along the way. So with metrics, just be really specific on what's most important to your workplace.
Okay, excellent. And then another question we have are, what have you seen that is really working right now for an organization? What is really, whether it's unique or more of a broad approach, but could you just give us a tip or some guidance on, what's this first step?
Yeah, so I want to emphasize, as much as I love well-being, I am the person that uses the term all the time. For some workplaces, the term just may not resonate. And so what I'm seeing work really, really well right now is, as long as there is a communication plan and strategy, when you can launch into this space of human sustainability, that is creating a cohesive big picture for your employees. And then the success with that is when you break down each of those five components that you could and should be tracking and measuring as human sustainability. Guess what? That's part of your ESG strategy. All we did was compartmentalize the social, or the S in ESG, and take it out and emphasize it more. Because we know from the data that that is the least supported component typically in a lot of organizations, because they're just so hyper focused on other components. So that is incredible. And then I want to go back and emphasize the human flourishing, because there is something to be said for workplaces that are willing to think outside the box, to not be reactive, and to be proactive. And when you apply something like a positive psychology perspective to it, and you begin asking questions, like I'd said, around emotions and meaning and relationships and what folks are accomplishing in their vitality, that is giving such a holistic picture. There are metrics to track with that. You can see the positive emotions that an individual gains, whether it's through programming or coaching or pairing the two together. And a lot of times in the workplace, we're just not giving the true space. Remember, I'd mentioned kind of that unstructured time. We've got to allow for that space, because it is the whole person. They're not working 24/7. So when we just pile things on and pile things on, and it becomes a program for the sake of participating in a program, the individual isn't going to be connected. So kind of two-pronged there, because I see human flourishing and human sustainability as two separate opportunities.
Yes, but are also important to have that combined comprehensive approach. So excellent. Thank you, Haley. Now, what tips do you have for organizations to go from good to great, or to really give themselves a boost?
Yeah. So what I'm going to suggest today, first tip is challenge what well-being means at your organization. And I'm going to think of kind of a linear scale right now, because organizations can be at varying points of that scale. And maybe there isn't a lot that needs to be challenged. But what I mean is challenge what well-being means. Challenge, do you have it defined? Do you have a mission, vision, value outline for your well-being within the business? And is that, is that known at the leadership level? Is that known in a management style? Is that part of the way that individuals are leading? Think of it like a checklist, and you're going through well-being offerings. And is this helping our well-being? Is it hindering our well-being? I will frequently offer audits with workplaces as well, to kind of go through a formal process. And then the
Mhm.
second component to that is challenge. So we've challenged what organizational well-being means for us in our business. And then challenge, do we need to stay on this path of well-being alone, or could it be inclusive of those components that we discussed with human sustainability? If your workplace is ready to make that change, you'll recognize it isn't as significant as you think. So the next tip I would have is, if your workplace is ready and eager to evolve, to grow, to truly become a sustainable environment within the workplace, begin to look at, what does that transition look like? What does creating a human sustainable practice look like in our business?
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. These are wonderful, wonderful tips. Everyone will receive a copy of the slides as well as a copy of this recording. I know I've taken a bunch of notes. So if you want to go back and reflect, that is absolutely coming. Thank you for joining us today. But before we wrap up, just want to announce the winner of the Stanleys, and is Sabrina Faree. We put in a random number picker. Sabrina, you are the winner. We'll reach out to you directly to claim a Stanley for yourself and your Galentine. And Make sure you join us for our next session, Thursday, March 14th. We will be speaking with Billy Morrison at Lincoln Learning. If you'd like to automatically be registered for this webinar, just type webinar or register into the comments, and I'll go ahead and add you in so you don't have to go through that step, so let me know. Haley, just to wrap up a bit, where can everyone find you and anything that you would like to add?
Sure. Yeah, I'd encourage you connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. You can find me there. You can find my business page on LinkedIn as well. Please reach out with questions. I try to promote and share even just little nuggets and tidbits and free handouts and resources on there that can be helpful for you. Would love to hear kind of what you're doing, and feel free to engage and share with me. Are you on this path of being curious about human sustainability as well? And or where well-being is kind of in that journey for your business, and what do you see for your own future? Would love to hear from you all.
Excellent. Yes, and definitely check out Haley's LinkedIn because she has wonderful content on there that everyone can glean something from. So thank you all for being here today. Haley, thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful. Copy of the recording and the slides are coming to you. Feel free to contact us anytime, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.